welcome. There was a young man who lost his father. His father died. It was a prominent businessman, and his son was following in his footsteps. A lot of people came to the funeral, and part of the receiving line of the funeral was people offering condolences, but also shaking his hand. And a lot of people, most people were giving him the two-handed handshake, if you know that, where you shake someone's hand, but then you bring your hand on top of it just because it brings a little extra feeling to it. And probably about 2 or 3 weeks later, he was back in business and he had just done a major pitch. And he nailed it. He did a really, really good job. And it looked like the contract he was proposing was going to come through. And the executive team, the CEO came over to kind of congratulate him. And they were all shaking his hand. And they were giving him the two-handed handshake. Fantastic job, man. About half an hour later, he realized he was feeling really sad. And when he traced it back, he realized it was connected to that two-handed handshake. That he was so kind of anchored in the two-handed handshake being associated with his loss and grief that when it happened again, it stimulated that feeling inside. I find that story really interesting because it brings up a really interesting question that I'd love to explore with you. Just how much are we programmed? Is all that you're doing in life responding to stimulation? And it brings up a really interesting thing for me, which is it possible to change that conditioning, to be aware of how we're conditioned? And beyond that, is it possible to make changes in our actions, that is to say, our habits? And is it possible that we could make small habit changes that could have big changes in your life? So, as I always do, I kind of break this talk into 4 pieces. Kind of part 1 is exploring the windows that make up the self. To take a look at exactly how are you conditioned and how do you work it. The second is to look at the anatomy of a habit. What goes into either a wholesome or an unwholesome habit? And it's kind of simple. The third is how do you shift unwholesome habits? What are some of the latest techniques that can help you do that? And then part 4, how do you cultivate habits that are good for you? And what you can measure, you can manage. Some tips and tricks for bringing in more habits that are going to move you in the direction that you want to be moving in. So I'm looking forward to this. I hope you are. There are times when I am practicing meditation and I think about this whole idea of what some traditions call the seat of the witness. Or when we talk about mindfulness, we talk about this non-preferential awareness that there's part of us that's fully conditioned, but then there's something in consciousness that is unconditioned, that there's something that's paying attention. And that's why I always use that phrase in meditation, which may be a little ad nauseum for you, but that state of where you're feeling deeply relaxed and at the same time alert. Because what it points toward is who you are as this being of energy and feeling, and who you are as a being of awareness. And so there are times when I wonder, when it comes to self-observation, what am I supposed to pay attention to? On one level, there's this play of energy, the particles and waves of sensations. And then kind of on top of that, there's sort of a feeling tone of pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. Then kind of on top of that or reactive to that are all the thought forms that come up, reacting to pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. There's an emotional quality to that feeling. And then kind of out of those thoughts come the beliefs. And then out of belief comes action. And that can come through speech. It can come through actions. Quite often they're habits that are unconscious. I can pay attention to my character structure, and then I can kind of sense where is this taking me? And what's so interesting is what is it in all these different levels of energy, thought, feeling, belief, habit, character, destiny, where is it optimal to pay attention? So when you break it down to seeing just what a conditioned machine the mind is, what meditation does is it begins to kind of unveil the unconditioned, that preferenceless quality of awareness that's aware of it all, which points toward where the freedom is. So a very brief little reflection, if you will. If you like, you can close your eyes. I can't see you, so you don't have to close your eyes, but you might try it. And if you would, take 3 slow breaths. Notice where you feel the breath on the inside, and just sense for a few moments if you can just track the feeling tone of the breath. And as you're aware of the sensations, you might notice the play of pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. You can notice the narrator, the commentator. And you might notice just a little bow to the beliefs that arise out of your experience, to the habits. And sense, what does it mean to be aware of awareness right now? What is it that is observing your experience? And in this moment, what is calling for that attention? So you might again deepen the breath, and as you're ready, you can let your eyes open, or you can remain with them closed. So when it comes to waking up, where do you best place your attention? Habitually, we hang out in the mind. We tend to be kind of cognitively oriented people. But you can explore your beliefs, which is amazingly powerful. Like, what are you believing? And then really nail into it. Is it true? All that sort of stuff. In meditation practice, we're guided to come back to the direct experience of here and now, because there's this great word in Pali called papancha. It's almost onomatopoetic. It's the proliferation that occurs from your inner experience. So it's like, papancha, here's a sensation, papancha, this reminds me of that, on and on and on. So when you come back to the raw experience of here and now, it's almost like you can catch it before it blows up into a thought and a story and habit and all of that. But you can pay attention anywhere. You can focus on beliefs, you can focus on your thoughts, and you can focus on your habits. And that's a little bit of what I'd like to explore. These are the actions you take, either out of reflex, either they're unconscious actions that you take, reacting to life, or they can be conscious actions that you take, responding to life. And looking at your actions, at your habits, I find to be a pretty cool way to pay attention. There's this really cool phrase. It says, there's no such thing as enlightenment. There are only enlightened actions. That is to say, only the actions that are done out of wakefulness. And that little line, we can spend a lot of time unpacking that, but for now, I'd like to take a look at the anatomy of a habit with you. How does a habit form? In many ways, it's pretty primitive. It's kind of baked into your neurology. Imagine you're a couple long time ago, the formation of our species. You're hungry. You find some berries. Something in your consciousness goes, remember this feeling of fullness and remember this place, because there might be more rewards here. Everything we do is based on rewards. Another way of putting it is everything we do is designed to reduce your anxiety, to soothe your anxiety, which is another kind of reward. We're looking for what brings us some form of wellness. And this is where it's really nice to offer a deep tip of the hat to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Because when you really sense if all you are is a need and reward machine, the most basic level is physiological. You need air, you need water, you need food. And if you don't have that, all of your life force is going to go to the next breath, water, and food. Now, when air and water and food are kind of handled, well, then you want to look for safety. You have a need for safety. You want to be secure. You want to have the resources that you need. You want to have good health. You want to have property. When that's satiated, then there's the next level of need begins to arise, and that's for a sense of love and belonging. That's when you're looking for friendship. You're looking for family. You're looking for intimacy. You're looking for connections that are meaningful. If that's satiated, then what you're looking for is you're looking for some kind of esteem. You're looking for respect. You're looking for status, for recognition, for strength, for a sense of inner freedom. And if that's handled, then you have a need for what's referred to as self-actualization. Or I like to think of self-realization. What am I? What is the mystery that I'm living in here? It can be seen as either the desire to be the best you can be or the desire to be self-aware. So these needs drive us all the time, and we are based on rewards. Another breath, water, food, safety, love and friendship, self-esteem, self-actualization, self-realization. What happens is, as you're navigating your way along, trying to figure this thing out, there's a habit loop that occurs. And the habit loop is basically like the action loop. There's a cue for something. Something signals, something's happening, which then sets up a craving, a wanting. And then there's the response to that craving or wanting. And then there's the reward. It's so ingrained we don't even see it. You walk into a dark room, the cue. You want to see, that's the craving. You turn on the light, that's the response. And you see, that's the reward. You wake up, you want to feel clear. You crave coffee. You have coffee. You feel more clear. Now, what's so cool about this is through mindfulness, you can look closer and you can really begin to see into the anatomy of your habits. Because some habits, they just don't make sense. Have you ever had that experience of like, why am I doing this? Why am I eating this? Why can't I stop this behavior? So, how do you begin to deconstruct the habits that aren't so wholesome? And how can you begin to cultivate the habits that move you in a direction that feels more alive for you? Great story. I remember this one from way, way, way back. And this is a story about Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, or Osho. Someone came to him saying, Osho, I'm addicted to cigarettes. I'm smoking 2 packs a day now. And I don't know how to stop. I've tried all kinds of behavior modification stuff. I've tried going cold turkey. I just can't do it. And Rajneesh said, do this. He said, I want you to smoke 2 packs a day, but I want you to do it as your spiritual practice. I want you to be awake to every inhalation, to every movement, to pay intimate attention to detail. Your spiritual practice now is to be aware as you smoke. Oh, when I first heard this, I thought, what is he talking about? You know what it's like when you're caught in a habit you know isn't good for you. Well, what happens is that this practice that Rajneesh had his student do, like this was 20, 30 years ago, is really considered a cutting edge technique now. It calls on mindfulness. And what it does is it breaks up this pattern of cue, craving, response, and reward. And what this fellow reported was that as he was being aware of smoking, as he was smoking, he could feel the cue, like the desire for the cigarette. He could feel the craving, but he wasn't really paying attention to the response and the reward. And what he realized was that as he was smoking, that he wasn't really enjoying it. And it's interesting how, for many people, the first time they smoke a cigarette, when they're a kid, is quite often they get sick. It's the reaction to the nicotine. Some people, they throw up when they smoke. But if you can get through that little reactivity, then you start craving the internal response of the nicotine, as it is incredibly addictive. And why it's so scary now that it's covered up in vaping, bubble gum flavor and butterscotch flavor, to get you past the reaction, to get you into the reactive pattern of physiological addiction. But the idea here is you bring mindfulness, non-judging awareness to the experience itself. And many people have reported that when they do this with smoking, for example, which is highly addicting, one of the hardest things to kick, is that when you're really aware of the practice of inhaling smoke and exhaling smoke, when you're really aware of it, it's not that pleasant. So a quick little reflection for you, if you like, you can close your eyes. And take a moment to think about some habit it's just that it isn't that good for you. And I'll give you a few moments to kind of select something. Some little habitual activity that really isn't that good for you. And just imagine you could be mindful of it all the way through. Every detail. You just sense the possibility of staying awake all through this cycle of feeling the cue and the craving and the response, and how that lands for you. If you like, you can deepen your breath. If you like, you can open your eyes, or you can remain with them closed. It's easy to say this. It's not easy to do it. For those who struggle with smoking, the cue is maybe you feel nervous. The craving, I need a cigarette. The response, I think I'll reach for it and have a cigarette. And then the reward is a sense of feeling calmer, perhaps. With my phone. Oh, I happen to have a moment when nothing seems to be happening. Then the craving. Oh, I should check my phone. The response. Hey, I'll check my email. And then the reward. Oh, I just filled up these seconds when nothing was really happening. And what happens is we anticipate the reward. So you anticipate the tail end of having a cigarette. You anticipate the pleasure that comes from checking your phone and finding something rewarding. But as you get mindful, non-judging awareness, you get to fully experience it. And you get to really look closely. Was it really that enjoyable? I just went to check my email and I ended up watching 5 videos of cats knocking over toddlers in snowsuits. Was this really helpful? This deconstruction process is, like in many things, it's so simple and not necessarily easy. It's been in many, many years now, maybe 4 or 5 years, but I've always liked beer. I like the taste of beer. I like the ritual of beer. I like the reward of kind of just the feeling of giving myself a treat, the relaxation. And quite often, there would be the cue. Hey, it's the end of the day. I put in my time today. And then the craving. Oh, I think I'll have a beer. Like just to take a cold beer out and open it and pour it into a glass. And then there's sort of like the response. Like, oh, what do you know? There's a beer right here in the fridge. And then the reward. I just reinforced that I'm a hardworking person who deserved a treat. And then Tara pointed out to me one day, she said, whenever you drink a beer, have you noticed that you complain about not feeling great the next day? And to my utter chagrin, I realized that was true. That it really wasn't that satisfying. I didn't feel better the next day. I usually felt a little dehydrated or a little bit off. And that kind of ended that routine for me. So what happens is when you find yourself caught in habitual activity that's not something you know is really wholesome, is it possible to be aware of the cue? Like, what is it that kind of sets you up for that desire? And then what specifically are you desiring? And then when you move into the activity or the habit, can you really pay attention to the experience? And then ask yourself, was the reward commensurate to the craving? Did it really fit? Was it commensurate? I'm going fast here, I know, because unpacking unwholesome habits it's tough, and I'm aware of the time frame, and I'll mention some books and resources at the end of this. But one person I do want to mention is James Clear, who wrote a book called Atomic Habits, and he said when you start assessing the unconscious actions in your life, you can kind of break them down to unwholesome and wholesome. And one thing he points out is that, and again, this is basic neuro-linguistic programming, that if you want to make a change in your life, associate pleasure to the change and unpleasant to not making the change. But when it comes to unwholesome habits, there are a few very simple but things you can do that make a difference. When there's unwholesome habits, you can explore, keep the item invisible. For example, rather than having a beer in the fridge, I could keep the beer in the garage. So I had to go and walk and get it. You can explore like the unattractiveness of it. Like I know some people are nail biters. Take a good look at your nails, for example. You can make it difficult. When we're on retreat, on meditation retreats, we recommend taking your phone or your iPad and put it in an envelope and seal the envelope and put it somewhere where it's kind of hard to find, maybe in the trunk of your car. So when you feel the cue and the craving to check your phone, you gotta find it, unseal the envelope, boot it up, and turn it on. The other thing you can do is explore in an unwholesome habit how unsatisfying it is. For example, how do you feel in the morning when you eat late, or if you drink late? So with unwholesome habits, to sort of make them harder to access, make them invisible or unattractive, make them difficult, make them kind of unsatisfying. And with wholesome habits, it's kind of the opposite. You can make them obvious, make them attractive, make them easy, make them satisfying. So one thing that I have done here is kind of recognizing that overnight you tend to lose about 1 liter of water just through respiration. So it's a really good habit to drink a large amount of water when you wake up. You get hydrated, it flushes the system, it can sometimes stimulate, cleaning the system out. But what I noticed is that a lot of times I would forget to drink water in the morning. Maybe when I'd start to get a dehydration headache, or I would just realize like, oh my God, it's late morning, I haven't had any water. So what I started to do was to have a glass full of water next to my bed. I've also experimented like putting it on a counter in the bathroom. Oh, there it is. If you want to do yoga in the morning, what if you put out your yoga mat and your yoga stuff and had it right there? So for the wholesome habits, make them obvious. Oh, hey, there's my dental floss right next to the toothbrush. You can make them attractive. Oh my gosh, here's a glass of water with lemon, all set out nice for me. Make them easy. Oh, my journal's right there waiting for me on my desk. It's like really easy to get at. And you can make them satisfying and a little bit unsatisfying, because there's a really cool little technique that you can use. So recognizing the actions that ultimately aren't satisfying, and you can explore some of the behavioral things that can make them more available to you to really bring mindfulness, to see clearly into the nature of them. Super, super helpful. To notice when you kind of go unconscious around a habit and see if you can really bring attention to that whole cycle of cue, craving, response, and then the reward. You can explore how to make those habits a little less visible in your life, make them kind of unattractive, make them difficult, and explore how maybe ultimately unsatisfying they are. But then it comes to the interesting part, or equally interesting, not more interesting, and that is like, how do you begin to rewire the habits that cultivate a more of a wholesome sense of here and now? And one of these has to do with celebrating the change, that kind of rewiring yourself. So Tara and I have talked about habits, and one of the things she's noticed is that she has to really pay attention to her balance. So she does these balancing postures in the morning. And the thing with balance, as you age, is it's really, you either use it or lose it. So balancing practices are really, really helpful. They're not necessarily fun, but they're really, really good. So she does them. But part of her wiring is you want to make that habit satisfying. So she pumps her fist and she goes, yes, just that little rewiring thing. It sounds silly, but it really makes a difference. So there are times when I'll be downstairs meditating and she'll be doing her thing and I'll hear her go, yes. So I love my wife. It's one thing she does that drives me nuts is she'll forget to put the car keys back in the drawer, and then I've got to go find them. And one time they were lost, which really drove me nuts. So she went out to run some errands. When she came back, I could hear her in her office, and I was downstairs and no car keys. So I sent her a text, and I said, when you put the car keys back in the drawer, be sure to pump your fist and say yes. And then I was working in my office, and I heard her go downstairs, and then I heard, yes. So bringing on positive can be really, really helpful. So what I'd like to suggest, wherever time is flying here, but in this remaining time, I'd like to offer a little reflection for you. And then I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the manic stuff I've done with habits. So if you like, you can close your eyes. And if you would, slow down your breath and take 3 slow, deep breaths. and bring into mind just one positive habit that you would like to incorporate into your life. And it doesn't have to be big. In fact, you might even, for the purpose of this exercise, make it small. Some little exercise, some little habit, some activity that you would like to incorporate. I'll give you a few moments to reflect on that. Now, can you imagine with this activity, is there a way that you could make it kind of easy and accessible? Is there a way you could create a routine that would kind of make it more obvious and kind of an attractive thing to do? And could you imagine after performing that habit that you might pump your fist and say yes? Now, can you imagine if you did this activity every day for a whole month? What do you imagine that would feel like after 30 consecutive days? And what would you need that would support you? If you like now, you can deepen your breath. As you're ready, you can open your eyes. Again, I'll be sharing some resources with you on how to kind of bring more mindfulness to the habits that work for you. But now I'm just going to blather a little bit about some of the experiments that I've done. I tend to get grim around self-improvement, and I know that there are two paths to awakening. One is the path of self-improvement, and one is the path of liberation. And self-improvement is a little bit like a treadmill, but nonetheless, it's entertaining and wholesome, and I learn a lot. So I've been fascinated with this idea of the minimum effective dose. Like what is the least amount you can do that's going to bring you the maximum return? And what I've noticed is when I've tried to create a habit like write 1,000 words, or do 45 minutes of yoga, or sit for 30 minutes, the stretch is helpful to a degree, but then I give up because it's just too much. So now I've kind of adapted that. I still write every day, but rather than a word count, I write for 25 minutes. 25 minutes solid. And you might ask, well, why not 30? 30 seems like too much. And also I do another technique called the Pomodoro technique, which is 25 minutes of focused exclusive activity and then a forced 5-minute break. And then 25 minutes of forced activity, exclusive activity, and then a 5-minute break. So I break everything into 25-minute segments with a 5-minute break. It seems to work for me. So now I just write for 25 minutes every morning. Rather than do yoga for 45 minutes, I do about 7 minutes of yoga. That's my commitment. That seems about right. 7 minutes I do is really, really good for me. And sometimes I do more, but sometimes I don't. And I always like to acknowledge my wife's strategy, Tara's strategy for meditation. She meditates every day. She just doesn't say how long. As we say, assume the position. It's a much softer way to go about it. I write for 25 minutes. I do 7 minutes of yoga. I assume the position for meditation. And what happens is it becomes pleasurable. I look forward to it because I'm not holding this sword over my head. So some of the habits that I have incorporated into my life, and again, I apologize for being a little OCD here. In the morning, first thing, make the bread. make the bread. No, that's later. I make the bed first thing in the morning. There's a great TED Talk out there from a military man on why they do this in the military. Basically, you start off the day with a sense of accomplishment. It's small, but when I make the bed and I walk through, the bed is made. It's a great feeling. I do some basic stretching, nothing heavy, but a little bit of stretching, particularly in my mid-back. I've got this long spine. If I can get that mid-back lengthened, it's going to be a better day. I drink some water. Used to be a full liter of water. That seemed like a little bit much, so now it's kind of a big glass of water. In the winter, when it's nice, I will start a fire in the fireplace, not just general. Start a fire in the fireplace. And that's like cozy and pleasant. And that will kind of like sets up something called triggers, where you can begin to link habits. So you do one habit and that'll link to the next habit. So what I'll do is I'll start the fire. And again, not every morning, but in the winter, quite often. And then that sets up a little trigger for meditation. Wow, meditating by a fire. Oh my God, it's great. After I finish meditation, well, that sets up a little trigger for making my coffee, my morning coffee. When my mind is awake and I'm feeling alive, well, that will trigger me to go into my writing. I write for 25 minutes solid, which sets up a trigger for this daily cartoon that I do. I do a little sketch, a little cartoon. I'm in my 3rd year now. When I'm done with that, that sets up the next trigger, which is a little ritual I go through where I reflect on the 3 most important things in the day that I want to cover. And then that sets up the next trigger, which is what we call time blocking, where once I've identified those 3 things, I actually put them into my calendar. And that time is dedicated for those activities. So that's a fair bit of activity, but it feels great. Make the bed, do some stretching, drink some water, maybe start a fire, meditate, coffee, write, sketch, 3 most important things, block out my time. I'm pretty primed for my day. In the evening, I kind of have some little habitual things. My Apple Watch will start to tell me when I should wind down. It's saying like, hey, couple hours before it's time to go to bed. So that triggers me to check my activity feed. Do I need to do any more exercise? Or do I need to eat something really light? Or am I really ready for the wind down? Oftentimes I will drink my final water for the night, or that's usually early evening. Then I'll brush my teeth. And I have a trigger with brushing my teeth, which is to do flossing. So once I brush my teeth, that triggers my flossing. And then I have the same routine before I go to bed. I put my phone in the other room. I put it away. And I do a short but powerful yoga flow. Again, it's short, but there are some challenging postures that I just like doing every evening before I go to bed. And then I'm ready. These become rituals for me that they just work. And I've worked at them, I've tweaked them, but I'm in a good shape right now. In between, I have a couple little habits I try to build in. Again, I mentioned breaking my day into these 25-minute segments with a forced 5-minute break. And I listen to my Apple Watch when it tells me to stand up. So one of the basic things around cultivating habits is it's a basic management technique that's been around forever that says you can manage what you measure. Jerry Seinfeld has a really beautiful thing, and now it's actually called the Seinfeld technique, where he realized that if he was going to be a successful comedian, he had to write his own stuff. If he was going to write his own stuff, he had to write every day. So he had a 30-day calendar. When he would write, he'd put an X through it. And the whole idea is you keep the visual chain going. And it's very satisfying. It's sort of like that fist pump of, yes, I did it. So I track my habits. I track my morning writing and the morning cartoon sketch thing. I track my exercise. And then I track kind of an evening gratitude thing I do, kind of inspired by my talk a little while ago on gratitude, where before we go to bed, we just talk about what we were grateful for in the day. And then I track 2 other things that change from month to month. And I'll talk about this a little bit more. But what I do is I do a practice. Every month I take on 2 particular habits for that month. One is an observation. It's a practice that I take on that I think will be good for me. And then I'll also take on a restraint. That is something that I'd like to experiment not doing and see what happens. And so this month, I'm doing one 25-minute piece every day on what I'm calling clean, organize, or design. So 25 minutes, that's about organization. So it's either cleaning out a drawer, cleaning out a room, organizing my financial accounting system, which really needs help, like kind of designing some new flow. 25 minutes every day. And then my restraint is one thing I'm going to get rid of. Either I'm going to give it away, I'm going to throw it out, or I'm going to sell it. So I'll have 30 things by the end of the month that I'm ejecting. I love this 30-day thing. And again, I'll talk more about it. And if you'd like to try it, I'll share more resources with you. It's a super, super helpful way to do short-term behavioral shifts. So you might reflect on that. If there's something you might want to take on as a practice and something you might like to try not doing. And again, I'll offer some resources in the future. But I did want to mention, just in these remaining minutes, just a few books that are really helpful. James Clear wrote a book called Atomic Habits, which is great. Also, Hugh Byrne, who's a teacher with IMCW, has written a book called The Here and Now Habit. I'm kind of bringing mindfulness to your habits. And another beautiful book by B.J. Fogg called Tiny Habits. And these are like the tiny changes you can make that can make a big difference in your life. So just with a few less than 2 minutes that I have remaining, if you like, you can close your eyes. And bring your mind again to some life-supporting, life-enhancing habit you might like to bring into mind and bring into your life. And imagine that every time you did this habit, you would pump your fist and go, yay. Imagine how, if you could incorporate this ritual into your life, how it would serve you and how it might be a benefit to those you love. And you might sense, is there a sense of what kind of support would you need? Would it be helpful to share this with someone? Would it be helpful to track it? As you're ready, you can deepen your breath. If you'd like, you can open your eyes. Mindfulness is this beautiful practice of cultivating penetrating insights into the nature of reality. And looking at your habits, your actions, your rituals can be a very powerful way to see into the unconscious reflexes in your life. It can help you to see a little more clearly into the conditioning around actions that ultimately don't support you. And as well, it can be a very powerful tool for increasing your capacity to look for the good and to be self-actualized, as Maslow says, or perhaps even self-realized. I wish you well. Thank you so much for your time and attention, and may you be well.